Well, folks, this week we are back in the Invasion storyline, looking at it 20 years later to see how well or how not well things have held up over time. And this week we're looking at SummerSlam 2001, the final SummerSlam under the WWF banner from August 19th at the Compaq Center in San Jose, California. This show was nominated by John Feuerhelm, Miguel Jr., Alan Jolly, and Juan on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. As I mentioned, the Invasion storyline still going strong after the pay-per-view of the same name is wrapped up. But my question here at this point as we go to SummerSlam is why? Because right now it's just like two different teams and they're just trading wins and trading championships on a weekly basis, and no real, it's like a war of attrition essentially. And there's no stakes as of right now because there were no stakes in the inaugural brawl at the Invasion, and up until Survivor Series later this year, there are no real like definable or easy to define stakes as to what these two sides are fighting for. Yeah, the Alliance wants to put the Federation out of business, but how are you doing that other than winning their championships on their shows? Like, how does that mean supremacy? I don't quite understand it at this point, how you're going to run the Federation out of business just by doing that alone. There's still a lot of unanswered questions here in this angle, let's just say. Also, one thing I want to get out of the way in this video is I want to take back all the bad things I have said on this arc so far about heel Steve Austin. Like, I still maintain that his original turn at WrestleMania 17 was poorly timed and shouldn't have happened then, knowing what we know now. But looking at this run in particular, the psychotic, paranoid champion, leader of the Alliance, Steve Austin, has been a lot of fun to watch. He's able to kind of ride that line between being deadly serious and scary and also really hilarious, like in the same segments, but it doesn't discredit him and it doesn't make me think, oh, he's not a serious contender, but or a competitor or anything like that. He just has this great range of emotions as he's doing his shtick. The amount of shine he's giving different people on this run is very surprising to me, and I think for the most part it's well done. And actually, you know, in a way, even though I question, oh, why should Austin join the Alliance? Like, in this kind of backhanded way, it's helping them because Austin is like sharing all this screen time with these other Alliance members you might not see so much on TV or hear from, and it actually kind of breathes some life into this group with so many kind of floating people kind of looking for something to do. Also, the big story of the Federation right now, The Rock is back after shooting his movie, but in kayfabe he was on suspension. The day after Invasion, Vince lifted the suspension and begged The Rock to come back, but the big mystery was, would he join the Alliance or would he stay home with Team WWF? As if there was any doubt. 15,293 folks in the building, 565,000 pay-per-view buys, down a bit, down about 5,000 from the previous year, and the highest it would get until 2005. Jim Ross and Paul Heyman on commentary. Heyman has rejoined the announce team as the voice of the Alliance on Raw. Interesting setup as we have the rare opposite end hard cam, where now the stage is on the right of the hard cam, not the left. I wonder why that is. The opening hype package sees a bunch of wrestling footage cut into the music video for Drowning Pool's Bodies. Let the bodies hit the flow. Let the bodies hit the flow. This was actually the theme song for the Alliance for a little bit until about a month later when it became in real poor taste to play this song all the time. Your opening match is for the Intercontinental Championship as Lance Storm takes on Edge. Storm beat Albert for the title on TV recently. In his pre-match promo, he explains he's still against offbeat shenanigans and wants to explain why as long as there are no interruptions.
Splendid. The reason.
You think you know me.
Edge off to a hot start, but he gets draped over to the top rope and flung into the barricade. A nice counter by Edge out of the maple leaf into a small package several minutes later. We occasionally cut to the Federation locker room where we see Christian and Edge's trophy seated front and center. Storm counters a crucifix with a rolling slam. Storm goes for a springboard attack, but Edge catches him into a power slam, which is nice. Edge on a good run here hits the Edge-O-Matic, but we get a 2 count. Catches a Hurricane Rana attempt into a powerbomb, another kick out. Storm gets the maple leaf applied. Edge powers out with the ropes and gets the hold on himself. The Rev is shoved down as Christian makes his way to the ring, but he spears Edge by mistake maybe, almost costing Edge the match, but he recovers, hits the big DDT to win and become the IC champion for the second time in his career. Christian hands Edge the title, gives him a little hug. Edge is confused. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. A pretty good way to open the show, showcasing two of your more athletic, your better workers here as they go at it. A lot of cool counters in this match I'd never seen before, which was a lot of fun. And a big win for Edge here, gaining another championship as he becomes more of a babyface with each passing week. And now, for me, all I can think of is just waiting for that inevitable breakup as Edge and Christian are about to implode. And really, their angle is going to be a big part of like the third act of the Invasion arc. The Dudley Boyz and the Alliance's newest member, Test, interviewed by Michael Cole. He turned 2 weeks ago on SmackDown, costing the APA the tag titles against DDP and Kanyon. Cole asks, why did Test turn his back on the WWF? Test is rightfully indignant, saying it was the Federation that turned its back on him because, after all, he was accused of being the Alliance mole for a while, and then he got beat up for those accusations, but he was wrongfully accused. So yeah, I'd be mad if I were Test as well. He talks about how his loyalty was for nothing and how the Dudley's loyalty to the company was for nothing, and that's why they're part of the Alliance. Elsewhere, what does Chris Jericho think about his opponent for the evening, Rhyno, who he's not been able to beat? Jericho says he will tame the Rhyno for the first time and adds, everybody remembers their first time.
I'm sure it was quite a memorable experience for Stephanie and the captain of the football team, and the basketball team, and the French club, and the Latin club.
6-man tag up next as the APA and Spike Dudley, accompanied by Molly Holly, take on Test and the Dudleys. It's a nice way to keep the Dudleys feud, the family feud with them going after Spike was temporarily taken off TV with an injury, but now he's back and they're trying to keep that going. And it's melding well with what's going on right now with Test having joined the Alliance. Heyman calling Spike the bully of Dudleyville, which is hilarious. He's victimized tons of people bigger than him. The nerve! Bubba Ray starts throwing Spike around, which is always a combination of really fun to watch and also really horrifying. Test the big old spine buster on Spike. The Dudleys set up a table on the outside and Test has evil intentions, but Spike escapes certain doom. Spike avoids a Devon splash and we get the hot tag for Test and Bradshaw. APA on a big run, a huge powerbomb to Test, but Bubba intervenes. Spike goes the Dudley dog, but Test throws him off his shoulders and through the table on the outside. The referee checks on that as Bradshaw's got the match won, but Shane McMahon flies in with a chair shot to Bradshaw. That allows Test to pin and win for his team. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. Match was okay. It accomplished what it needed to in showing the big moments of Spike getting thrown around hither and yon, and also really further establishing Test as this new threat within the Alliance. I think he really benefits, I think almost more than anybody on the side of people who defect to the Alliance. I think Test, and we'll see this as it plays out, my theory is that Test benefits from this more than just about anybody, but we'll see. In the WWF locker room, the Hardys and Lita congratulate Edge on his title win. Christian barges in and announces he's got a European title match against Matt Hardy tomorrow night. Suddenly, he and Edge's grandma Edna calls in and wants to talk to Edge. Christian looks a bit miffed. Elsewhere, Shawn Stasiak goes into Steve Austin and Deborah's dressing room and chats up with Deborah. Stasiak's new gimmick, well, it's kind of a different version of a gimmick he was already having, like in WCW, kind of a himbo character, but it's way cranked up here for comedic effect. It's very similar to like Austin Theory's character right now in NXT with the way, just the big buff dude with a 10-cent brain. That's kind of what Stasiak is showing here. And he just began his running gag of like running into walls, trying to get after people, which to me was always hilarious, and actually watching it back here, it still holds up. Stasiak says he knows what his problems have been lately. His tights are bad luck. He doesn't even know what mecha means. Deborah browbeats Shawn for coming in at a tense time as Austin's getting ready for his match and says if he wants to impress Steve, to go out and kick some butt. Your first of 2 title unification matches here as light heavyweight champion Tajiri defends against cruiserweight champion X-Pac. So at one point, X-Pac did hold both the championships. He beat Jeff Hardy for the light heavyweight title the day after King of the Ring, and then about a month later, he beat Kidman for the cruiserweight belt, and then a couple weeks before SummerSlam, Tajiri beat X-Pac for the light heavyweight title. Hope that all makes sense, but now we have a unification match here. Good back and forth at the start, X-Pac doing his little flippy thing when Tajiri does one of his own into a Hurricane Rana, a baseball slide, and an Asai moonsault. X-Pac crotches Tajiri on the corner post, begins to take over. X-Pac going with a surfboard, they slip a bit, but X-Pac just rolls around and gets it again. Very cool recovery. X-Pac somehow gets himself in the Tree of Woe when attempting a Bronco Buster. Tajiri gets the Tarantula locked in. Some crazy stuff out of the corner here, some interesting near falls, a big old plancha from X-Pac. Tajiri begins to come back, but then we see X-Pac teammate Albert, or as Paul Heyman calls him, the Rabbi of Retribution. Albert gets on the apron, but immediately gets some red mist for his troubles, walks right into an X Factor, and X-Pac wins both titles. I give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. Very well done, very exciting match with these two. I really enjoy the chemistry that these two had. A lot of cool stuff I saw in the match that kind of like in the opener with Edge and Storm, some spots I'd never seen before. To me, the finish, though, was kind of meh, especially when you consider we are now 3 for 3 on matches that have outside interference affecting the end. And as X-Pac regains the light heavyweight title, he will also go down as the last person to hold it. He would later drop the cruiserweight title back to Kidman, then go off TV with an injury while still the light heavyweight champion by the time he comes back back at the beginning of the following year, the belt is quietly retired. And I guess while we're here, we can talk about the legacy of the Light Heavyweight Championship now that it's wrapping up. I think it was obviously, like in the late 90s, the belt had been around for a while, but in the late 90s, it was clearly the Federation's answer to the Cruiserweight division in WCW. But I don't think the WWF ever put the level of care and like airtime and exposure and like the quality into their their light heavyweights, I should say, as WCW did with the Cruiserweights, and that really showed. It was kind of an underappreciated belt by the Federation. They didn't really put it on that much of a pedestal after the initial push of it, and then it was just like really irrelevant for a very long time, unfortunately. You had some interesting matchups. I think like Dean Malenko and Scotty 2 Hotty was a great feud for that belt. Jerry Lynn was a pretty good light heavyweight champion. I think that Taka Michinoku was great as the champion as well. There's a lot of good that was in there. S.A. Rios as light heavyweight champion was one of my favorites for a while. There was a lot of good there, but also you just could tell they didn't really care about that division as much. There wasn't as much focus, and I think the quality of the division and just the way the belt was treated really suffered as a result in the long term. And I think getting rid of the light heavyweight belt and in favor of the Cruiserweight Championship was the right call. We go to WWF New York, where Perry Saturn is on the search for his true love, Moppy, who has been missing for a week now. The American Dairy Council has joined the search by putting Moppy's face on milk cartons. Backstage, Stephanie McMahon gives Rhyno a big pep talk and says she needs him to beat Jericho one more time. Rhyno says he'll finish Jericho off once and for all. So we go to that match now as Chris Jericho takes on the Man Beast, the last ECW champion Rhyno, who has been the muscle for Stephanie over the last several weeks, especially in her war to get rid of Chris Jericho and shut his big mouth. Rhyno has beaten Jericho at every turn for weeks, even gored him through the old SmackDown set, which of course the following week we got the new SmackDown set with the fist and the broken glass. Huge upgrade. Early on, Jericho goes up top, but Stephanie grabs his leg, distracts him long enough for Rhyno to gore Jericho out of the sky on the outside. Rhyno drapes Jericho on the ropes, making it at least the third time we've seen that spot in 4 matches tonight. Rhyno works the abdomen and upper body of Jericho. Rhyno goes to the splash but gets none of it, but look at where he's jumping in relation to where Jericho is. He wouldn't have hit him anyway. Jericho comes back, hits the big drop kick, but Stephanie gets on the apron. Jericho gets in her face and plants a big old kiss. Yeah, forcing yourself on her will show that slut. Rhyno with his own version of the walls of Jericho, but we get a rope break. Rhyno misses the gore. Jericho's got the walls in, and Rhyno taps. I give this one 2.5 stars out of 5. It was okay, you know? It was right down the middle for me. It wasn't a great match, wasn't a bad match by any means, but I don't know. It just didn't do much for me, so I just kind of leave it right in the middle. Backstage, Commissioner Willie Reeves asks The Rock if he's okay after the beating he got on SmackDown last week. Rock says yes in his roundabout way. Then they both dodge Sean Stasiak trying to run in on them. That's some real good shit, and I'm saying this without any kind of like irony or not trying to be snarky. Like the Sean Stasiak running gag, where him being this total dolt running into walls and stuff, was like one of my favorite things watching 20 years ago, and it still is now. It gives me a big belly laugh every time. In the first ever ladder match for the Hardcore Championship, Jeff Hardy defends against Rob Van Dam. Yes, the title has changed hands once again between them since Invasion. It actually happened the week before this show on Raw, where Kurt Angle was facing RVD in a non-title matchup, and in the middle of it, Jeff has his own referee and pins RVD to regain the belt. So this one here I'm excited about because they stole the show at Invasion the previous month. Can lightning strike twice here? Early on, the action goes to the outside. Hardy hits a springboard flip-de-doo, and in doing so, looks to clip his leg on one of those way too close together announce tables. RVD is the first to grab a ladder. Hardy flies off the barricade onto him. Cool little seesaw spot with the ladder, then Jeff with one of his own moments later. Both men are hurting. JR at one point on commentary says Jeff is holding his anatomy, which is a hilarious description. Oh, my anatomy! We see a tree of woe, which again is like the 3rd or 4th time I've seen that spot tonight. A super rolling thunder by RVD onto the ladder in the corner. Van Dam does a crazy leg drop over the ropes and on the ladder, and while he's doing that, Heyman describes RVD's mentor as suicidal, homicidal, and genocidal, but does not actually name him. Jeff goes to climb the ladder, but Van Dam kicks him off. Moments later, RVD tries Jeff with a missile dropkick to lay it all out, Van Dam landing on Jeff's legs. Hardy goes to the Swanton but gets none of it. RVD goes to the frog splash but also misses. A superplex off the ladder, and both men are down. Jeff climbs the ladder, grabs the ring, holding the belt up when he very easily could have just grabbed the belt. RVD swings him out, goes for a big kick off the top rope, but totally whiffs it because Hardy does not let go in time. Then Jeff just kind of awkwardly falls on Rob. What the fuck was that? Jeff climbs up, gets dumped off. RVD climbs, grabs the title, and wins the belt back. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. It's a good match, but doesn't quite live up to the standards of the match at Invasion, which I know is a real high standard to follow. But then, that notwithstanding, that finish, how they totally fucked it up. It would have looked great if Jeff had let go in time and RVD just kicked him out of the sky. It wouldn't have made much sense for Jeff to let go the way he did. Actually, it was a more realistic way of doing it. But then just the way they kind of covered for it was just like, it just kind of ruined the whole rest of the vibe for that match. WCW champion Booker T and Shane McMahon backstage. Shane's got a gift for the Booker man. It's a pair of bookends made from the broken announce table that Booker bookended The Rock through on SmackDown. It's for books. Then it's time for our second unification match, a steel cage match for both the WWF and WCW Tag Team Championships as DDP and Kanyon defend against The Undertaker and Kane. Kanyon actually a double champion going into the show. He was gifted the US Championship by Booker T after Invasion, and he actually joined DDP in his fight against The Undertaker that began at King of the Ring. 2/3 the Jersey Triad reuniting here. Those two did beat the APA to become the new WWF Tag Champions. Then The Undertaker and Kane immediately beat Palumbo and O'Hare that same night to win the WCW gold, because of course they did. As the match begins, we hear to what I believe is the first or one of the first uses of the Decade of Destruction branding for The Undertaker they're going to use the rest of the year here. Kanyon and DDP just get their asses kicked for the entire time. This is somehow worse than when Taker beat up DDP at King of the Ring. Kanyon gets powerbombed into the corner of the cage. They eventually let Chris escape. Then it's 2-on-1 against DDP. Taker telling Page to leave the ring now. He'll let DDP live. Page begins to climb, but just kidding. Chokeslam off the top. Then the last ride. Taker and Kane win both tag titles. See you again tomorrow when Sarah beats Paige in a match on Raw. I give it a 0.5 star out of 5. Not much of a match, honestly. Pretty much a glorified squash match. And just poor DDP, poor Kanyon, who's been sucked into this thing now. He's been brought into the Angle's orbit. The build to this angle on TV was actually a little bit better than the match itself because Kanyon and Paige look somewhat competent in the build to this. But like when it comes to pay-per-view time, it's just like no prayer for these guys. Backstage, The Rock tells the trainer he's fine. Sean Stasiak comes and goes again. Then it's time for the WWF Championship match as Steve Austin defends against Kurt Angle. At Invasion, Austin betrayed the Federation to join the Alliance, explaining he felt that he was being pushed out by Vince McMahon, accusing Vince of grooming Kurt Angle to take his spot. Kurt becomes the hero of the Federation by default and really ups his intensity in the ring while playing up the whole American hero thing as well. That is a really big part of Angle's push right now, is this renewed kind of insistence on, oh, he's his American hero. It's kind of like an unironic version of how he was portrayed as a heel when he debuted for the company in '99. He's doing these raw American speeches and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, which is all fine and dandy except for the fact that Austin, the person he's feuding with, is also from America. And the way they're framing this now as Kurt Angle and the WWF somehow being more American than the Alliance doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's just a weird way to frame it. It just also comes off as a big antithesis of what fans have been taught to cheer for so long, because Angle being the wholesome, yay, America #1 sort of thing is just kind of flies in the face of guys like Steve Austin and The Rock and the anti-heroes and the badasses and stuff like that. It came off kind of weird that all of a sudden it's like, cheer for Kurt Angle because he's an American, boo Austin because he is an American, but he's also from WCW, it makes you a worse American. But speaking of Austin, his paranoid champion character, like I said, is pretty great. He says he leads by example, but he browbeats and disrespects the Alliance members who don't do what he says. We get a brief angle within an angle where Taz is repeatedly disrespected, and you want to see Taz kind of rise up and fight back against Austin, but it turns out to be a swerve on the SmackDown before the pay-per-view. It was pretty disappointing for sure. The two meet on the ramp and begin to brawl before the match begins. After the bell rings, Austin begins to work on Angle's leg, continuing what he'd been doing on TV for the last week or so. Austin on the attack, but Angle begins to fight back with some suplexes, 7 Germans in a row. Austin with a big superplex of his own onto Angle, both men are down. Austin with a stunner, but Angle kicks out, hits another one, Angle rolls out of the ring. Steve drives Angle's head into the corner post several times, and the Olympic hero is busted wide open. The beating continues on the floor, into the crowd, blood smearing all over the concrete. Angle catches Austin in the ankle lock, and we get this extreme close-up of a bloody Angle screaming, "Tap, you son of a bitch! Woo!" Back in the ring, Austin gets in the ropes to get out of the ankle lock. Angle with some more suplexes on the outside, some more arguing from Heyman and JR as this is going on. Angle actually hits the moonsault, but we get a 2 count. Austin slips in the $1 Million Dream, his rare submission from the Ringmaster days. Angle lands on top of him in a pin, but Austin kicks out. Austin with a 3rd stunner, but Angle somehow kicks out. Austin goes for a 4th, Angle blocks it, hits the Angle slam. Austin kicks out, and moments later just decks the shit out of the referee. In comes another ref, another kick out. Austin with a blatant low blow, then he hits the ref with a stunner. In runs Tim White, but Austin hits him with the title. Another Angle slam. In comes Nick Patrick, who starts to go for a count, but then stops and rings the bell. Angle is won by DQ. Steve Austin keeps the belt though, and irate Angle grabs Patrick, decks him, and puts him in the ankle lock. This gets 4 stars out of 5 for me. This is my favorite match of the show. It just by far has way more drama and intensity and intrigue than anything else so far on SummerSlam for the night. Angle's strength and resilience, how he's able to fight back from Austin, and the story of Austin cannot beat Kurt Angle straight up, so he's just got to like cheat to win and keep the belt and everything. Even though the DQ finish is disappointing, it all plays into that story and makes for a very good match overall.
He can't beat Kurt Angle for the WWF title. Can you argue that point? Can you disagree with that? Hell no!
It's now time for the main event, the WCW Championship on the line as Booker T defends against The Rock. Booker T has become a 5-time champion since the invasion. He lost the belt to Kurt Angle, then got it back within the week. Meanwhile, like I mentioned, The Rock is back in the Federation after being gone from his kayfabe suspension / movie shoot. And now he's got the Booker man in his crosshairs. Rock practically Billy Guns Booker in a series of promos for weeks degrading Booker and the championship, which is really weird because if he's fighting for it, he constantly degrades the belt too. Also, the entirety of Booker's act at this point is just being an idiot who copies The Rock in promos, trying to audition for movies like The Rock. They make an angle out of the bookend versus The Rock bottom, calling the Spinneroonie the most electrifying move in sports entertainment and so on. For a side in the battle that is already having such a hard time, with most of its members having a hard time finding their own identity outside of what color t-shirt they're wearing, it's not a great look for the champion to also be in that same boat. It just feels really reminiscent of like the New Blood Millionaires Club angle in 2000 in WCW, where it's all these young guys who want to like take the old guys' spots and try and show they're cool and new and hip, but also at the same time stealing a lot of the older guys' gimmicks. Also, what all this does to me in the grand scheme of things, it just really makes it a foregone conclusion as to who's really winning this thing. Some early shtick involving Booker and Shane McMahon on the outside. There's some back and forth. Booker takes Rock down with a sidekick, but The Rock throws him out of the ring. Fighting on the outside, The Rock gets thrown around as Shane undoes a turnbuckle pad in the ring. Rock fights out of a hold and gets the sharpshooter locked in. Somehow not as bad as Shane McMahon's. Speaking of whom, Shane meddles and gets thrown in the ring. Booker capitalizes. A slingshot into the exposed bolt and a DDT, but Booker kicks out. Wow, that really didn't play a factor in this match at all, did it? Shane sets up a chair in the corner. It distracts the ref as he decks Rock with a WCW title. Out comes the APA and Shane runs right into a clothesline from hell on the floor. My God. Booker with the bookend and a kick out. Rock hits the spine buster, the people's elbow, but Shane dives onto the ref and breaks it up. Rock bottom to Shane on the floor. Poor Shane tonight. Booker hits his own spine buster, the axe kick, then the Spinneroonie. Rock kips up, hits the rock bottom and wins. Welp. The Rock has handed the belt and looks like he has no idea what to do with it. Wait, I buried the hell out of this guy for weeks and now I get this? Ew. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. The match was all right, but it just felt so paint by numbers as to how they booked this thing. Just going into it, like every step of the way, all you know is that The Rock is winning. And I've said this before, that you gotta at least make the journey interesting, even if you already know where the end point is gonna take you. But this was not interesting. The build wasn't very interesting, the match execution wasn't very interesting, and yeah, just didn't hold my attention before or now. My grade for SummerSlam 2001 is a C+. This show does not have any real breakout matches or moments or anything really immortal in that sense, but most of what you see on this show is good. I think Angle versus Austin is the best match on the show by far, despite the disappointing ending. There are only 3 matches on this show that don't have some kind of outside interference going on, but of those 3, one's got a botched finish, the other is a squash, and the other does have a fuck finish in the DQ thing, but at least there's no outside interference. Alliance. I'd rank this SummerSlam as above average. It just feels like this angle, the invasion storyline, is in kind of a holding pattern at this point in the post like invasion pay-per-view euphoria of like, okay, what are we doing and where are we going? What is the end game here? It's still kind of up in the air at this point, and this show to me feels like a reflection of that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review, folks. In 2 weeks though, we are taking a break from the invasion storyline once again to go back in time to the year 1992, arguably one of the greatest years in WCW history, and this next show is going to feature Sting's Squadron versus the Dangerous Alliance in a War Games match. I'm talking Wrestle War 92. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.